Hey there. Forget the bedtime fairy tales you were handed when you were small. The truth is darker than that. And, strangely, calmer. Tonight I'm going to show you 3 things that shouldn't be gentle, but will be, if you let my voice carry them the way a slow river carries fallen leaves. A child laid in a pit and dusted with red ochre, so the body looks like it's bleeding even after the heart has stopped. A skull with a neat round hole cut into it. A surgery done with stone and patience, while the world outside is freezing, and an entire coastline, homes, fires, laughter, quietly drowned under 400 feet of sea, as if the ocean decided to swallow memory itself. If you find peace in this kind of darkness, leave a like or subscribe. Nothing loud, nothing demanding. Just a small signal, like a coal glowing under ash, so this story can find other sleepless minds. Now, lower your screen brightness. Let the room get dim. If you can, turn off the light. Let your shoulders sink a little. Unclench your jaw. The muscles around your eyes don't need to work right now. Breathe in slowly, and out even slower. And imagine that you and I are sitting beside a low fire in a dark room. Candlelight trembling on old wood. The air warm near the flames, and cool at the edges where shadow gathers. I always feel a little strange when I ask someone to picture time. Not a calendar, not a neat row of years. Real time. Deep time. The kind that doesn't care about our schedules. Close your eyes and picture 100,000 years. Not 100, not 1,000. 100,000. It's almost embarrassing how small our proud history becomes when you do that. Think of everything we usually call the past pyramids and empires. Ships and wars. Poems and treaties. Libraries burning. Libraries being built again. All of it, stacked together, is like a thin book on a massive shelf. Civilization, cities, agriculture, writing, laws carved into stone, governments with seals and stamps. Civilization is only about 12,000 years old. That's it. That's the little candle we've lit in a very long night. Before that, there's a stretch of darkness so wide it makes the mind wobble. A gap, a forgotten chapter. And the unsettling part is that it isn't empty. People were there. Anatomically modern humans. Humans who would look like you if you passed them on a street. Humans with brains as large as ours, with the same capacity for language, for tenderness, for grief, for curiosity, have existed for at least 200,000 years, maybe more, which means that for roughly 190,000 years, we lived without the things we usually use to remember ourselves. No books, no calendars, no written names, no archives. And yet, I want you to feel it in your chest. There were evenings, there were mornings, there were jokes and quarrels and lovers turning their faces toward each other in the dark. There were children who learned how to laugh and then learned how to be quiet. There were old people whose hands shook when they lifted food to their mouths, and still someone fed them. There were songs, actual songs gone now, like breath on cold glass. Sometimes people say they were hunter-gatherers, and they stop there, as if they finished a sentence. Sure, technically. But that's like saying you live inside a building and eat food. It's true, and it misses everything that matters. What haunts me, honestly, it's the thing that makes me stare into firelight too long, is that the evidence we do have suggests they weren't just surviving, they were creating. We find shell beads in southern Africa about 75,000 years old, arranged with a kind of intention that makes your skin prickle. Not an accident, a pattern. Someone sat and pierced tiny shells, one by one, and strung them, not because the shells would help them hunt, not because a necklace makes the winter warmer, because meaning had already moved into their world like a quiet, invisible animal. We find cave paintings in places like Indonesia, 40,000 years old, and if you've ever stood in front of an ancient painting, really stood there, not scrolling past an image, you know that odd sensation. like being watched by someone who is not there anymore. Those animals on the walls aren't clumsy. They have motion. They have attention. They have the artist's breath in them. We find flutes carved from bird bone and mammoth ivory, 30,000 years old, with holes placed carefully enough to produce real notes. I always try to imagine the first person who made one, the patience, the testing, the small adjustments. The moment when a simple breath finally became a sound that could change the mood around a fire. And those are just the things that survived. Stone lasts. Bone sometimes lasts. Shell lasts. But the real world of those people, the wooden tools, the woven baskets, the skin tents, the cords and nets, the painted bodies, the carved masks, the story spoken into smoke, most of it is gone. Rot, water, time. The slow chewing mouth of the earth. Archaeologists have a name for this ache, the deep time paradox. We have fossils that prove humans existed. We have genetic evidence that populations grew and moved and shrank and surged again. We know, with a cold certainty, that people lived full lives in that span. They loved, they fought, they lost each other, they held hands in fear, they whispered plans, they stared at the stars and pretended they understood them. But the physical evidence of all those lives is so sparse that whole continents and time periods are represented by a handful of sites, a few dozen places. Sometimes, that's all. Nearly 200,000 years of existence across an entire planet, and what we can hold in museums could fit in a couple of storage rooms. It's unsettling because it means we're trying to reconstruct an ocean from a cup of water. So let's not pretend we can know everything tonight. Instead, let's do something softer and, in a way, more honest. Let's walk through the darkness carefully. Let's take what the ground gives us: flints, ash, bone, pigment, and let's listen to what those fragments whisper. Not loudly, not with certainty. More like you listen to rain at night and let it become a rhythm. Picture the world before civilization. No roads, no fences, no streetlights, no clocks ticking in a kitchen. Just land, sky, wind that knows no human name. In that world, your ancestors moved in small bands, 20, 30, maybe 50 people, not a tribe as a nation, a family as a universe. Imagine how intimate that is. Every face is familiar. Every mood is noticed. Every sickness matters. If one adult dies, everyone feels the loss in the muscles of their own arms. Because there are fewer hands to carry water, fewer eyes to watch for predators, fewer backs to carry children when the group has to move. And move they did. They followed herds. They followed seasons. They followed the subtle green promise of water. They learned landscapes, the way you learn a loved one's face, slowly, with repetition, with affection, with fear of losing it. I always think about the first time a child in that world understood the idea of distance. You know the feeling when you're young, and you suddenly realize that the horizon is not the edge, that there are places beyond places, a strange, widening sensation in the ribs. That child would grow into an adult who could walk for days with nothing but a stone blade, a hide bag, a few twisted cords, and the knowledge carried in their mind like a carefully tended flame. And the nights were not empty. They were full of sound, the crack of firewood, the soft chewing of people eating, the occasional sharp bark of laughter, then quiet again, the distant cough of an animal, the low conversation that you can't quite make out, like the murmur you hear through a wall when you're half asleep. Darkness was a real thing then, not the cozy darkness of a bedroom with a phone beside you. A darkness that could contain eyes, a darkness that could contain hunger, a darkness that could hide the slow approach of something that wanted you dead. But here's the part that feels almost like a spell. They learned to make that darkness livable. They learned fire not just to catch it, but to keep it, and eventually to call it into existence with hands and stone and friction and stubbornness. Fire meant warmth, yes, but fire also meant a boundary. Predators hesitate at flame. Fire meant that children could sleep without constant panic. Fire meant extra hours of light, and those extra hours, those long, shimmering edges of the day, became the cradle of culture, because when the body is fed and warm, the mind begins to wander. It wanders into story, and story is where human beings started to become terrifyingly, beautifully complicated. Tonight, as you drift, we're going to step deeper into that complicated darkness. We'll look at the things that survived stone tools scattered like teeth across ancient camps, charcoal stains where fires once lived, beads and pigments and bone flutes, and we'll also look at the things that did not survive, the invisible 95% that makes the past feel like a ghost. We'll talk about coastlines that are now oceans. We'll talk about ice sheets that bulldozed whole worlds. We'll talk about small groups and why they stayed small, and how they punished anyone who tried to become a tyrant. We'll talk about the quiet violence in the bones and the quiet kindness in the healed fractures. And I promise I will keep the tone soft. We can hold dark truth without clenching. So breathe again, slow and easy. Let the fire in your imagination crackle. Let your thoughts loosen their grip. We're going back, not to a myth with heroes and monsters, but to something older and stranger. The long, lost chapter where humans were already human, and the earth simply forgot to write it down. I want to begin with something simple, something that almost feels like nothing, a footprint. Not the clean, sharp footprint you might leave on wet cement. I mean a footprint pressed into mud near a river, or into sand near a tide line, the kind of mark that lasts for a few hours, maybe a day, then disappears. Most human moments are like that. We happen. We press lightly into the world, and then wind comes, rain comes, animals walk over us, the ground heals. That is why the past is so quiet. So picture one person from those lost years, no name we can speak, no face we can truly recover, just a body, warm with blood, a mind full of thoughts, a set of hands that know how to do things you and I would fumble. They wake before sunrise, not because an alarm demands it, but because the air changes. You know that change, even in modern rooms. The moment when the world shifts from deep night to the first thin suggestion of morning. A coolness that feels like stone. A hush, and then a bird call, single and sharp. Their eyes open to smoke. Smoke always clings to hair and skin in those camps, and I can almost smell it now. Dry wood, charred fat, a faint sweetness of resin. The fire is low. Coals breathe red under gray ash. Someone has been up in the night, feeding it, because letting the fire die is like letting the group's heart stop. They sit up slowly. Their back aches, not the ache of an office chair, but the ache of sleeping on ground that never quite becomes comfortable. A hide might be folded under them. Grass might be packed thick. Still, there's always a root, a stone, the subtle cold of earth rising into bone. Around them, bodies shift. A child in the curve of a mother's arm. An older man's breathing, rough and wet. The quiet, rhythmic movement of someone waking and immediately checking without thinking where the spear is, where the blade is, where the fire is. Outside the shelter, maybe it's a ring of branches and hides. Maybe it's nothing more than a lean-to the world waits. It doesn't care if the humans wake or not. It is simply there. Wind runs through grasses. Water moves. Somewhere, an animal walks, and its hooves press their own temporary signatures into the soil. And here is the first dark truth I want to lay down gently, like a blanket. The world is indifferent. People like to imagine ancient life as either pure harmony or pure brutality. It was neither. It was a tension. constant attention, a kind of alertness that modern humans rarely have to practice. Your ancestors listened to the world the way you listen for a loved one's footsteps when you're worried they won't come home. They knew, without written notes, which direction the herd had moved. They could read the angle of broken grass, the softness of dung, the way birds circled in a particular pattern. They could look at clouds and feel a change in pressure and know that rain was coming before the first drop fell. That kind of knowledge is intimate. It's also exhausting. But it made something else possible. It made time. Because when you know the land that well, you don't have to fight it every hour. You can gather food in 3 or 4 hours, and then there is leftover day. There is the slow stretch of afternoon. There is the pause where someone repairs a cord, where someone shapes a wooden shaft, where someone hums a tune that has no obvious purpose except to be heard. This is where I always feel a small ache. We think we have invented comfort, but comfort has many shapes. Sometimes comfort is not a couch. Sometimes it's a circle of familiar people, bellies fed, the next water source known, the fire steady, and the freedom to sit and do nothing but watch shadows move. If you let yourself picture that, you might notice something else, a subtle grief, because those people are gone, and we can't call them back. We can only guess at their lives through scraps, and yet, in the dark, scraps can glow. So as the morning light rises in your imagination, as the smoke thins and the first tasks of the day begin, keep one thought resting softly behind everything. This is not the beginning of humanity. This is the middle of a story that started long before writing, and the ending of a story that the earth will eventually erase again. Just as it erases all things. You don't need to hold that thought tightly. Just let it sit there, like a stone warmed by fire, and we'll continue. The next thing I want you to notice very gently is how easy it is to misunderstand someone when you only find their leftovers. Imagine walking into an abandoned house 100 years from now, but the roof is gone, the walls have collapsed, and all you find is a pile of nails and a few bricks. You could say, they built with nails and bricks. True, and still so wrong, it would almost be funny if it weren't tragic. That's what we do to the deep past. We find stone tools because stone is stubborn. Stone survives floods, fires, glaciers, the slow grinding teeth of time. You can bury a hand axe for 100,000 years, lift it out, wipe the dirt away, and it still looks like something you could hold today. Its edge might even still cut you if you're careless. So the museums fill with stone. Scrapers, cutters, points, choppers, thousands of them. Some sites look like the ground itself has sprouted flint, like sharp little bones pushed up through soil. And the mind, hungry for neat stories, wants to conclude, these people were simple. Their technology was simple. Their lives were simple. But when I sit with that thought, it doesn't feel right. It feels thin, like a blanket that doesn't cover your feet, because stone was probably only a small fraction of what they used. 5%, maybe less. The rest was made of things that time loves to eat. Wood, bark, plant fiber, leather, sinew, feathers, reeds, hide. Think of the quiet genius required to turn plants into cord. You have to know which fibers won't snap, which rot quickly, which can be softened in water, which become stronger when twisted. You have to pull the fibers, separate them, rub them between palms, twist them the way you twist a thought when you're trying to make it make sense. And then you braid, over and over, with patience. A cord is not glamorous, but a cord holds the world together. It ties a stone point to a shaft. It binds a shelter again. Cordage is civilization in miniature, and it almost never survives. Now let your mind drift to a simple spear. Not a Hollywood spear, a real one. A wooden shaft, straightened over heat, scraped smooth so splinters won't cut your hand. Its balance matters. The center of gravity matters. If you've ever held a stick and tried to throw it, you know that some sticks seem to fly and some do not. Your ancestors learned that difference with bruises and hunger. In rare, miraculous conditions, waterlogged bogs that seal out oxygen wood can endure long enough to be found. In Germany, archaeologists found wooden spears dating to around 400,000 years ago. Not crude pointed clubs, carefully shaped throwing weapons, balanced like modern javelins. And when I read about that, I always pause, because if people could make something that refined that long ago, what else did they make that simply didn't get the miracle of preservation? Probably everything. Shelters, too. We imagine caves because caves survive. They are convenient containers for evidence. But caves were often temporary, winter refuge, storm refuge, a place to retreat when the world outside was too sharp. Real homes were built under open sky, frameworks of branches, covered in hides or reeds, anchored with stones. When the group moved, the shelter might be abandoned, and within a few seasons, the wind and rain would erase it. The soil might keep a faint memory, a dark stain where a post once stood, a circle of stones that used to hold a hide down against wind. And then there is the ocean. This is the part that makes the lost years feel like a deliberate curse. During the last ice age, so much water was locked up in glaciers that sea levels were roughly 120 meters, about 400 feet lower than today. You could walk from England to France. The Persian Gulf was dry land. Southeast Asia and Indonesia were connected by a vast exposed subcontinent called Sunda. Australia and New Guinea were one landmass. And humans love coastlines. Even now, when we have highways and airplanes, most people live within a short distance of the sea. Coasts offer food that doesn't run away. Shellfish, fish, seabirds. Coasts offer fresh water at river mouths. Coasts offer predictable migration routes and mild climates compared to harsh interior extremes. So where did ancient humans likely live? In their thousands of generations of quiet life, on coasts. And where are those coasts now? Underwater, 400 feet down, in many places. I want you to imagine that for a moment, slowly, the way you might imagine a dream you're not sure you had. Picture a low shoreline, the smell of salt, the sound of small waves, not the dramatic crashing kind, just the steady breathing of water. A camp set a little above the tide line, a ring of stones, ash from a fire, a scatter of shells, children playing with driftwood, someone scraping a hide, the rhythm of stone on skin, soft and steady, someone cutting fish, someone mending a net made of plant fiber. Now picture the sea rising, not all at once like a mythic flood, though later myths would describe it that way. A slow, relentless climbing over centuries, over millennia. A shoreline creeping inland, year after year. The place where your grandparents slept becomes wet sand. The place where your mother gave birth becomes a shallow pool. The fire ring is swallowed. The ash disperses. The shells sink. The stories remain. But the evidence, everything we would need to prove it later, slides underwater like a sigh. Entire populations could have lived there for thousands and thousands of years, and we would never know, not because they didn't exist, but because the sea took the receipts. And it wasn't only the sea. The ice itself was a bulldozer. Continental glaciers during ice ages were miles thick. They advanced like slow white monsters, grinding rock into powder, erasing landscapes. Anything beneath them, campsites, hearths, bones, tools, was crushed, smeared, pushed, destroyed. When the ice retreated, it left behind a reworked world. Lakes where there had been valleys, moraines piled like scars, soil scraped away. So when you wonder why Northern Europe, Northern Asia, Canada, and the Northern United States give us so little evidence from deep time, remember, The ground there has been repeatedly sanded down by ice. Even in places untouched by glaciers, climate swung wildly. Deserts became forests. Forests became grasslands. Rivers changed course. Wind scoured surfaces. Floods buried sites under meters of sediment. Tectonic movement swallowed others. The earth is not a museum curator. It is a restless animal. It turns. It sheds. It forgets. And yet, despite all of that forgetting, we keep finding small things that don't fit the old, tidy story. We find ochre, processing red iron oxide collected, ground, mixed with fat or water used in large quantities, not because it feeds you, not because it sharpens a tool, because it marks something in the mind. It turns skin and stone into symbol. It makes bodies look like they're carrying sunset on them. We find beads and engravings and patterns regular, intentional, abstract. And when you see abstraction that early, you have to admit something. These people were not dim. They were not half awake. They were thinking in layers, the way you think when you remember and imagine at the same time. We find evidence of systematic fire use far earlier than most people expect. Controlled fire is not a simple trick. It requires knowledge that has to be passed on. It requires practice. Try making fire from scratch sometime. 2 rocks, a bit of dry tinder, and you'll feel how stubborn the world can be. Now imagine teaching that skill to a child, patiently, repeatedly, until their hands learn what to do without panic. We find evidence that humans reached Australia at least 65,000 years ago. And you cannot drift to Australia by accident. Even with lower sea levels, there were open water crossings. That means boats. Not necessarily sleek ships, but watercraft built with intention. That means planning. That means navigation. That means looking at a horizon of water and saying, "We will go anyway." I always get a chill there, not because it's frightening, but because it's so human. That mixture of fear and curiosity. The willingness to step into uncertainty. So the picture that emerges is not a simple ladder from primitive to advanced. It's messier. It's more like breathing, expansion, contraction, populations rising, developing rich knowledge, then collapsing under climate disaster, disease, resource strain, then rising again, sometimes forgetting what was known, sometimes reinventing it. Genetics shows bottlenecks, moments when numbers crashed. Each crash is not just bodies lost, it is knowledge lost, songs lost, techniques lost, names lost. It is like a library burning, except the library is made of living minds. And here, in a dark history story told softly, is the tender horror. If a sophisticated culture existed and worked mostly with organic materials, wood, fiber, hide, we might have almost no evidence it ever existed. A few stone flakes, a scatter of bones, and silence. Silence can be mistaken for absence, but it isn't. Now, let's return to the small band again. Let's walk back from the ocean's edge and the glacier's shadow, back to a circle of people who know each other's voices. How do you keep peace in a group with no police, no written laws, no presence? You keep it with closeness, with shame, with laughter, with the constant awareness that if you fracture the group, you die. Anthropologists talk about a sweet spot bands of 20 to 50 people. Below that, there aren't enough hands for big game hunting, childcare, defense. Lose a few adults, and the band collapses. Above that, intimacy breaks. Trust begins to fray. People form cliques. Jealousies sharpen. Food becomes a bargaining chip. Someone begins to imagine themselves as more important than others. And when that happens, the group responds, not with speeches, not with written constitutions, with mockery, with refusal, with social pressure that feels, to a human brain, like physical pain, sometimes with exile. And in rare, grim cases, ethnographic accounts suggest this collective execution. A would-be tyrant can be an existential threat, not a political inconvenience. A threat to survival. This is where the darkness enters quietly, not in grand wars, but in the small, intimate violence of necessity. A spear point in the ribs, a cracked skull, a decision made around a fire with faces turned down, voices low, because everyone knows what must be done, and no one wants to do it. And yet, this is important. Bones also show something else. Healed fractures. A broken limb that set correctly means someone carried that injured person. Someone brought them food. Someone protected them when they couldn't walk. Elderly people with worn joints and missing teeth who lived long enough to become truly old. Rare, but real, means care. It means value. It means that compassion existed as a survival strategy. Violence and tenderness layered together. That layering is, to me, the most human thing in the whole story. Now, as your breathing slows, I want you to hold one image and let it drift. A night camp on an Ice Age plain. The fire is small because fuel is precious. The wind pushes at the shelter, making hide flaps softly, like a slow heartbeat. Somewhere out in the dark, animals move. The group huddles close, sharing warmth. Someone's hands are busy twisting fiber into cord, repairing a net, shaping a point. Someone murmurs a story, not for entertainment, but to teach a child which berries kill and which heal. The child's eyes are heavy. The story is a lullaby and a manual at once. And above them, the sky is full of stars, bright enough to make the world feel watched. No one knows they are living in a chapter that future humans will call prehistory. To them, it is simply life, and life, in that long darkness, is both fragile and stubborn. Let that stubbornness settle into you. Let it become a quiet rhythm, because next, we will follow the mind of those people as it begins to dream in symbols, paint, burial, music turning fear into ritual, and ritual into a kind of calm. Tonight, we step into the place where evidence gets quieter and the human mind gets louder. Because stone and bone can tell you what people ate, what they hunted, where they sat, but they can't easily tell you what they feared when the fire dropped low. They can't tell you what a mother whispered into a child's hair when the wind sounded like teeth. They can't tell you the shape of a dream. And still, the deep past leaves fingerprints of the inner world. I want you to imagine a cave, not the cartoon cave, bright, roomy, a convenient living room for cavemen. I mean a real cave, a mouth in a hillside that exhales cold air even in summer. A darkness that begins only a few steps inside, the ground damp in places, slick with old mineral sweat, the smell, wet stone, bat droppings, smoke that clings to the walls like a memory. Standing at the entrance, you can hear the outside world, the wind, the insects, the distant calls of animals. Step in, and those sounds get swallowed. Your own breathing becomes loud. Your footsteps become a kind of announcement. This is not a place you wander into by accident, which is why it matters that people went in anyway. They carried fire with them, torches, bundles of resinous wood, or sticks wrapped in something that would burn slowly. The flame would snap and hiss in the cave air, throwing light that never stays still. Shadows would stretch and shrink like living things. Every small movement of the torch makes the walls seem to breathe. And then, somewhere deep enough that daylight can't reach, deep enough that the cave feels like another world, someone begins to paint. I always feel a strange tenderness when I picture that moment, because painting in a cave is inconvenient. It is dangerous. It is, in strict survival terms, unnecessary. So why do it? Maybe you've felt something similar. You know that sensation when you're tired and safe, and yet your mind insists on making something. drawing, humming, arranging objects, telling a story simply because your inner world needs to touch the outer world. It's like pressure seeking release, like a quiet ache that becomes calm only when you make meaning. The pigments were not store-bought. They were made with hands and patience. Red ochre, crushed into powder, black charcoal, white clay, mixed with fat, water, saliva, whatever binds, then applied with fingers, with chewed sticks, with brushes made of hair or plant fibers. Some marks are soft and smudged. Some are crisp enough that you can almost see the exact moment the hand hesitated, then committed. On the wall, animals appear: horses, bison, deer, lions, rhinos. Not symbols in the simple sense. These animals have posture, weight, motion. A bison's shoulders are heavy. A horse's legs carry tension. Some figures overlap, layered like thoughts. Some are placed where the rock bulges, using the cave's natural shape to give the animal a rib cage, a belly, a muscle. It doesn't feel like primitive art. It feels like attention, a mind, studying life, and then recreating it with tenderness. And then there are the hands. Hand stencils everywhere, in some caves. A palm pressed against stone, pigment blown around it, leaving a ghostly silhouette, an absence shaped like a person, a signature without a name. If you let yourself linger with that, really linger, you might feel the hairs on your arms shift, because a handprint is intimate. It says, I was here, I touched this wall, I had a body, I existed. Now, hold that thought and let it darken softly. Those hands are gone. The bodies that made them are dust. The voices are silent. The stories are gone, unless they somehow echoed forward in other stories. What remains is a negative shape on rock. It's almost unbearably gentle. And now, let's turn from cave walls to the ground. Burial is one of the clearest places where the inner world leaks into the outer. Animals die, and they are eaten. They are left. They are forgotten. But humans again and again, across time and geography, treat human bodies differently. Sometimes the body is placed in a pit. Sometimes it's curled like sleep. Sometimes it's stretched out carefully. Sometimes tools or ornaments are placed beside it. Sometimes the body is dusted with ochre red pigment that, in firelight, looks like blood. You know that feeling? When you see red on skin and your brain reacts before you can think? Red means injury. Red means life leaving. Red means danger. So what does it mean to paint the dead red? Maybe it is symbolic blood, a way of returning life, or honoring it. Maybe it is a marker. This is not an animal carcass. This is a person. This person mattered. And in some graves, the care is so elaborate, it becomes almost painful to imagine. A child buried with beads. Beads take time. Each bead is a small decision. Someone has to gather shells, pierce them, smooth them, string them. To do that for a child who will never grow up, that is grief turned into labor. I always feel Lat Lung strangely moved when I think about the first time a group decided to stop, to dig, to arrange a body, instead of simply moving on. Because stopping costs time. It costs energy. It costs vulnerability. Predators don't wait politely while you mourn. So the decision to bury is, in a way, a declaration. Our feelings matter enough to risk survival. That is a dark beauty. And from that same inner world, half grief, half wonder, small objects appear. Figurines, carvings, the so-called Venus figurines. Small bodies with exaggerated curves, often faceless, sometimes smooth from handling. It's tempting to project modern ideas onto them. Fertility symbols, goddesses, pornography. People argue, and the truth stays quiet. But whatever they were carried. They were made and kept. And that tells you something. Someone wanted to hold an idea in their hand. In a harsh world, the idea of abundance, milk, fat, pregnancy, survival can become sacred. Not because it is polite, because it is necessary, because life is fragile, and the body is the only home you truly have. Now, follow this thread a little deeper. If people are painting in caves, burying the dead with pigment and ornaments, carving small figures, making music, then there is almost certainly ritual. And where there is ritual, there is often someone who becomes a specialist. Not a king, not a priest with a temple, something older and quieter. A person who knows how to stand at the edge between fear and calm. A shaman, if you want to use that word. Picture the small band again. 20, 30, 50 people. When sickness comes, fever, infection, a strange swelling, a child coughing, until the lungs sound like wet cloth, there is no clinic, no antibiotics, no explanation that feels satisfying. So the mind reaches for meaning. If someone in the group has a way of soothing panic through chant, through rhythm, through touch, through knowledge of plants, people will lean toward them. If someone can enter trance, can dance until exhaustion opens strange inner doors, can describe visions, that person becomes important. Not because they are superior, but because they are useful to the nervous system. They are a technology of calm. Neuropsychologists have noticed that certain patterns, grids, dots, zigzags, spirals, appear in altered states, sensory deprivation, trance, migraines, psychedelics. And some ancient cave art contains these very patterns, not just animals, abstract marks that feel like the mind drawing itself. I'm not claiming certainty. We can't. But we can imagine gently. A cold cave, drums of stone, hands clapping, feet stamping, a chant rising and falling until the mind slips sideways and someone paints what they saw inside. And where there is trance, there is often music. For a long time, people assumed ancient music was lost. Drums made of skin, rattles of wood, the human voice itself. None of that fossilizes easily. Then we found flutes, bird bone, mammoth ivory, shaped with a precision that demands respect. Holes placed so that breath becomes pitch, pitch becomes pattern, pattern becomes emotion. I want you to hear it in your mind now, not a modern melody, not a polished performance. A simple line of notes, wavering, human. The sound would carry into darkness and make the darkness feel less. It would teach memory. Because songs are survival manuals disguised as beauty. A lullaby is not only comfort, it is timing, rhythm, the regulation of a child's nervous system. A hunting chant is not only tradition, it is coordination. A grief song is not only sadness, it is a way to make pain bearable in a small group where you can't escape each other's emotions. And now, because we are telling a dark story softly, we should speak of the catastrophe. Around 74,000 years ago, Mount Toba in Indonesia erupted in what scientists call a supervolcanic event, one of the largest eruptions in the past 2 million years. Ash traveled vast distances. Ice cores preserve its signature like a scar. The climate likely shifted. Temperatures dropped in many places. Ecosystems trembled. Now imagine being a human band during a time like that. You don't know the word volcano. You don't have graphs or models. You have sky. A sky that grows dim. A sun that looks sick. Ash that falls like gray snow. Rivers that taste wrong. Animals that vanish. Children who cough. The air that feels heavy. And you keep moving. Because movement is what you do when a place becomes hostile. Here is where language, true language, rich language, may have saved us. Because when conditions change fast, you can't wait for evolution. You need culture. You need the ability to share what works. Someone finds a new water source and tells others. Someone discovers that a certain route keeps hunger quiet. and teaches the children. Someone figures out how to make warmer clothing, or how to store fat, or how to trap smaller animals when big game becomes scarce. The band survives not by heroism, but by cooperation and communication. And when the world steadies again slowly, over long years, those survivors carry their inner world with them. Stories, rituals, symbols, songs. So when you picture the lost 100,000 years, don't picture only bodies chasing animals. Picture minds building invisible architecture, meaning memory, belonging inside the dark. The cave wall is one piece of that architecture. The red ochre on a burial is another. A flute note is another. These are not extras. They are the quiet machines that kept humans human. Now, let your breathing slow further. Let your shoulders sink. If your mind wants to wander, let it wander. I'll keep the path lit, because in the next part of our journey, we leave the cave and step back into the wide world. We follow those story-filled minds as they begin to move out of Africa, not in one grand march, but in hesitant waves, coastlines, river valleys, deserts that were once green, and everywhere they go, they meet others, cousins in the dark, humans who are not quite us, and yet close enough that their blood still whispers inside many of us today. Before we step onto that migration trail, I want to sit with you beside the fire one more time. Feel the circle of warmth, the soft boundary where cold air becomes bearable. Beyond it, the night holds its breath. Inside it, faces appear and disappear as flames tilt. Someone feeds the fire a branch and the resin pops, tiny sparks jumping and dying before they can become anything. A baby stirs. A parent rocks them, not always with words, sometimes with nothing but a steady motion that tells the small body, you are held, you are safe. The old ones sit close, knees drawn up, eyes reflecting orange light like quiet pools. Somebody begins a story, not entertainment, a tool, a map. It teaches which river looks calm but kills, which berries shine but poison, which ridge hides a lion's den when the wind shifts. And the story also carries grief names spoken again so they don't vanish, laughter described so it can live one more night. When the story ends, bodies settle, the fire is banked. Someone stays awake a little longer because love makes you vigilant. And in that long, wakeful moment, half duty, half dream, the future begins. Curiosity does not sleep forever. A younger person watches the darkness as if it were a doorway, imagining a valley not yet seen, a shoreline not yet tasted, a place where the herds might be thicker, where the water might run even in dry season. At first, the movement is small. A hunting party goes farther than usual. A drought makes a familiar route feel suddenly wrong. Then, over generations, the drift becomes a tide, and the tide begins to pull humans out of the place that birthed them, into a world already inhabited by other humans, other minds, other fires. If you're comfortable now, if your jaw is unclenched, and your hands feel heavy, let's follow that tide. Out of Africa doesn't happen like a trumpet blast. It happens like a thought you can't quite ignore. A season comes where the rains return to a corridor that used to be dust. A coastline becomes generous with shellfish. A herd shifts its route by a few miles, and a hunting party follows, then keeps following. Someone marries into another band and decides not to go back. A child is born in a new valley, and to them, that valley is home. The old homeland becomes a story. Wave by wave, pulse by pulse, humans move. I want you to picture the northeastern edge of Africa, places where land thins toward the Red Sea, where the air can taste of salt and heat, where rock holds the day's warmth and releases it slowly at night. You can feel sand underfoot, not the fine beach sand of postcards, but gritty grains mixed with shells, broken and sharp. The wind combs it into ripples that look like frozen water. Coastlines are migration highways. They always have been. On a coast, food is reliable in a way. Inland food is not. Shellfish stay where they are. You can learn the tide. You can return to the same pools. Fish can be trapped. Seabirds can be watched. Even the smell of the air can tell you something when the wind turns, when a storm is coming, when the water is low enough to expose hidden meals. So humans hug the edge of the world and begin to slide north and east. They don't carry flags. They don't call themselves pioneers. They carry babies. They carry fire. They carry stories about water and danger and where the sun sits when it's time to move. And they carry inside them a mind already trained to make meaning. Now, as they enter the Levant and the Middle East, the world changes texture. The nights can be colder. The plants look unfamiliar. The animals move differently. Even the sky, same stars. Yes, but arranged over new hills, new horizons, feels like it belongs to someone else. And in a way, it does, because humans are not alone. This is one of the strangest truths about our past. For long stretches of time, Earth wasn't inhabited by one kind of human. It held several, cousins, variations on a theme, different bodies shaped by different climates, different histories, different accidents of survival. In Europe and parts of Western Asia, there are the Neanderthals. Try not to imagine them as monsters. That's the old insult we inherited. Imagine instead a people perfectly adapted to cold, broad chests, powerful limbs, faces shaped by wind and winter. They had fire, they had tools, they cared for the injured, they buried their dead. Their lives were not simple. When modern humans arrive, contact begins. Sometimes contact is cautious, distant observation, tracks in snow, the faint smell of another camp's smoke carried on the wind. Sometimes it is competition over the same herds, the same caves, the same sheltered valleys when winter bites. Sometimes it is exchange, a tool traded for a material, a story swapped for another story, an uneasy curiosity that pushes fear aside just long enough to learn. And sometimes it is intimacy. This is not speculation. It's written in bodies alive today. Many people carry Neanderthal DNA, which means in the deep past, there were nights when the line between us and them softened. There were shared fires, shared warmth, children born who carried both lineages inside their blood. I always feel a quiet sadness there, because we tend to tell this story as if one group erased another, cleanly, like an ink stroke. But real life is messier. Real life is grief and desire braided together. People can fight and still fall in love. They can fear each other and still share a meal. They can be enemies by day and family by night. And yet, over thousands of years, the other human species disappear. Why? We don't know. We have theories, and each theory is a kind of lantern in fog. Maybe modern humans had wider social networks, larger webs of exchange, making them more resilient to famine and injury. Maybe language was more complex, allowing faster sharing of survival tricks. Maybe disease played a role, pathogens moving between populations with devastating effects. Maybe climate shifts squeezed Neanderthal populations into smaller and smaller refuges until luck turned cruel. Or maybe this is the unsettling possibility: there was no single decisive advantage. Maybe it was mostly demographic math. Small populations are fragile. A few bad winters, a few missed births, a few unlucky accidents, and the lineage thins like smoke. However it happened, by around 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens becomes the only human species left standing. The world grows quiet in a particular way. Now, as humans push east and south across Asia, they meet other cousins too, the Denisovans, known mostly from fragments, from DNA, from whispers in our genomes. In some modern populations, Denisovan genes still shape bodies, adaptations to altitude, to air thin enough to make your chest ache. Think about that. A meeting tens of thousands of years ago, still changing how someone breathes today. That's not history in the distant sense. That's a ghost living in your lungs. And then, far to the southeast, comes one of the boldest steps humans ever took: Australia. By at least 65,000 years ago, possibly earlier, humans are there, on a continent that was never fully connected to Asia. Even when sea levels were low, there were water gaps that had to be crossed. So picture the shoreline of what is now Southeast Asia in the Ice Age. Sea level lower, yes, exposing wider plains, turning islands into larger landmasses, but still, channels of water, dark, moving, unpredictable. You don't accidentally found Australia. To get there, you need craft, rafts, dugout canoes, something that can carry people and supplies. You need planning, enough individuals to form a viable community, not just one desperate survivor. You need timing, weather windows, calm seas, knowledge of currents. You need courage that doesn't call itself courage, just necessity mixed with curiosity. I like to imagine the first crossing at dawn, the air cool, salt on skin, wood wet under fingers, the water making that small slapping sound against the hull, soft, repetitive, almost hypnotic. A child watching the horizon, wide-eyed, not fully understanding that the adults are doing something no ancestor has done before. Behind them, the old shore shrinks. Ahead, a darker line of land rises. Birds circle. The smell changes, different plants, different soil. And when feet finally touch the new land, it is not a triumphant shout. It is a quiet exhale. A moment of stillness where everyone listens. What sounds live here? What predators? What insects? What rivers? What rules? Then life begins again. Hunting, gathering, building, shelter, learning the new world's language of tracks and seasons. And as humans spread across the planet, something becomes obvious. We are not a species built for one habitat. We are built for adaptation through culture. In the far north, where winter can kill in a night, people learn to stitch clothing, not just wrapping in hides, but tailoring needles of bone, thread of sinew, seams that keep warmth close to skin. They learn to build shelters that break wind. They learn to follow migrations like reading a living calendar. In the tropics, where heat and disease and venom hide in green, people learn plants the way a pharmacist learns pills. They learn which sap burns and which heals. They learn how to move through dense foliage without wasting energy. They learn to poison arrows, turning tiny points into deadly certainty. In deserts, they learn water, how to find it, how to store it, how to taste it, and know if it will make you sick. In mountains, they learn thin air, steep paths, the slow pace of breath when the body complains. And then, in the far northeast of Asia, as the last ice age tightens and loosens like a fist, another doorway appears: Beringia, a land bridge between Siberia and Alaska, exposed when sea levels drop. Not a narrow path, but a broad, cold steppe, grass and tundra under a pale sky, wind that never seems to stop, herds moving like dark rivers across snow. For a long time, people told a neat story. Humans crossed Beringia around 13,000 years ago, walk through an ice-free corridor, and populate the Americas. But evidence has been arguing. Footprints, tools, genetics, suggestions that humans were in the Americas earlier, perhaps 20,000 years ago or more. If that's true, then the first Americans may have traveled along the Pacific coast, using boats again, hugging shorelines the way humans once hugged Africa's edge. I find that oddly poetic. The same strategy, repeated across the world because it works. Now, imagine the Americas filling, not instantly, but astonishingly fast in geological terms. Humans moving down coasts, up rivers, across plains, each new landscape teaching them a new vocabulary of survival. Arctic tundra, to temperate forests, to deserts, to jungles, to the wind-scoured south. And everywhere they go, the same pattern repeats. Small bands, networks of exchange, stories carried like invisible luggage. By the end of the last ice age, humans are everywhere. And here is where the dark turns gentle again, like a blanket pulled higher, because being everywhere sets the stage for a new question. Once you know the land, once you have mapped it with stories and scars, once you have learned the seasons and the animals and the plants, your mind begins to wonder, what if we stay? What if we stop drifting? What if we change the land itself? That question will eventually lead to villages and fields and kings and walls. It will lead to the kind of history that leaves ruins and written records, and also to the kind of darkness that comes with property, hierarchy, and war. But we are not there yet. For now, we remain in the long, slow world of before civilization, where the night still belongs to wind and fire, where the biggest mysteries are not monuments, but the missing lives, millions of small human days that vanished without writing. And as you sink deeper toward sleep, I want you to feel one last truth settle in your chest. These wandering people are not them. They are you, stretched across time. Your bones are shaped by their walking. Your nervous system is tuned by their vigilance. Your longing for story, for ritual, for belonging in a small circle of warmth that comes from them. In the next part, we will look even closer into the body itself. What this life did to muscle and tooth and gut. How health and hardship lived side by side. How violence left marks. And how care did too. But for now, just let the image fade. A coastline at dusk. A small band moving like shadows. The ocean breathing beside them. And behind their eyes. A library of songs. Stay with Beringia a moment longer. Because if you've never felt true cold, the kind that makes your nostrils stick for an instant when you inhale, it's hard to respect what those people did. The wind there is not a breeze. It is a hand pushing on you. It finds gaps in clothing. It slides under fur and makes skin tighten. Snow doesn't fall politely. It travels sideways, stinging cheeks like fine sand. Walking in that cold becomes a rhythm. Step, crunch, step, crunch. The sound is oddly comforting because it means the ground is solid beneath you. Every now and then the crust breaks and your foot sinks and your whole body tilts and you feel that brief spike of annoyance, fear, fatigue, all the small emotions that come when survival is physical. Breath becomes visible, clouds of it, a private weather, and the landscape is wide in a way that makes the mind feel small. No trees for miles in some places, just low plants, lichen, grass trapped under ice, and the occasional dark line of animals in the distance. When a herd appears, bison, reindeer, mammoth, you don't see food first, you see moving warmth. You also see danger. At night, the fire is harder to keep. Wood is precious. The flame is smaller, more protected, like a secret. People sleep closer together, not for romance, but for heat. Someone whispers a joke that makes you smile despite hunger, because the brain needs relief the way the body needs fat. And when they finally reach the other side, when the land tilts into what we now call Alaska, there is no sign saying, you have arrived. The wind feels the same. The sky looks the same. Only later does the world become unmistakably new. New birds, new plants, new rivers, new dangers. Then the great spreading begins again, quiet and unstoppable, like seeds carried on a current. Let's come in closer now, so close you can almost hear the small noises a skeleton never records. Because bones are honest, yes, but they are also quiet. They tell you about pressure, about strain, about the blunt fact that something heavy was carried for years. They don't tell you the taste of smoke in a throat at dawn, or the way hunger feels when it's not panic yet. Just a gentle, familiar emptiness you carry like a second skin. Still, if you listen the right way, the body becomes a kind of archive. I want you to imagine one of those people, one of the long wanderers standing beside you. Not a mythical ancestor with exaggerated muscles, not a cartoon savage, just a person, a human with a face you could recognize in a crowd today. Maybe their hair is cut unevenly with stone. Maybe their skin is weathered in a way you can't fake. Their eyes would be the strangest part. The eyes are always the same. Curious, measuring, tired, sometimes alive. They are built differently than most of us. Not taller in every place, not stronger in some magical way, but shaped by repetition, by walking that never stops, by squatting near a fire so often that hips learn the posture, by carrying children, water skins, bundles of wood, slabs of meat, baskets of roots, by sleeping on ground that doesn't forgive your spine, then waking and doing it again. And if you could touch their forearm just gently, you might feel the density under the skin. The muscle doesn't exist for display. It exists because life demanded it. Their bones would carry thick ridges where muscles anchored, little architectural reinforcements built by years of use. When archaeologists look at those attachment sites, it's like reading the repeated sentence of a life. Carry, pull, lift, walk. You know that feeling after a long day when your legs are heavy, but there's also a kind of satisfaction because the tiredness makes sense? I think those bodies lived inside that feeling most of the time. Tired? Yes. Also tuned. Now, let's talk about teeth, because teeth are intimate evidence. They hold the grit of a landscape. They hold the diet, the season, the small habits of a mouth. Hunter-gatherer teeth, in many regions, show fewer cavities than the first farmers who come later. That's not because they were healthier people in a moral sense. It's chemistry. Sugars and sticky starches cling and rot. A diet heavy in grains changes the mouth. Before that, food was varied, fibrous, often gritty, yes, but less consistently sweet and starchy. Look closer and you'll see wear, sometimes severe wear. Like the teeth were tools as much as they were teeth. People held plant fibers between molars to soften them for cordage. They pulled sinew through teeth. They chewed hides to make them supple. A mouth can be a workshop when your hands are cold. And sometimes the teeth show thin lines, almost like small rings on a tree, stress markers, years when the body had to slow its growth because food was scarce or illness took hold. Those lines are so quiet, so small, and yet when you notice them, you can't unsee the truth. There were lean seasons. There were children who grew up with hunger as a familiar visitor. This is where I always feel that lung again. Because the popular image is either paradise or horror. The truth is more like weather. Some days are clear. Some days break you. Most days are somewhere in between. Diet in that world is not a single paleo menu. It's improvisation guided by expertise. A big kill is abundance and danger at the same time. It draws predators. It draws other humans. It draws disease if you don't process it quickly. So the work begins cutting, hauling, drying, smoking, sharing. Sharing matters here in a way that modern life rarely forces you to understand. If someone hoards, the band fractures. If the band fractures, you're alone. If you're alone, you die. So food becomes social glue. It moves from hand to hand, not as charity, but as mathematics. Tonight you eat because someone else succeeded. Tomorrow, someone eats because you did. It's a system that runs on trust, enforced by daily reality. And then there are the plants. This is where the expertise becomes almost invisible, because we modern people are blind in a landscape. A forest can look like green to us. To them, it was a pantry, a pharmacy, a map of seasons. A grandmother, if she was lucky enough to live that long, might walk slowly, fingers brushing leaves, eyes scanning for the subtle signs. The plant that looks innocent but makes your stomach seize, the root that calms fever, the bitter bark that dulls pain. Knowledge like that isn't written. It's carried. It's sung. It's told as story. I can almost hear a voice by the fire. Remember the one with the red berries. Remember what happened to the boy who thought it was sweet. The children listen, pretending they aren't scared. They are scared. They remember anyway. Now, health. In some ways, these people could be healthier than us. Stronger bones, more movement, more diverse micronutrients, less constant sugar. In other ways, their world is brutal. Infections are the silent killer. A cut in the wrong season becomes a death sentence. A tooth abscess can spread and kill. Childbirth is a cliff edge. Fever can take someone in a day. And yet, there are signs of care that make my throat tighten a little. We find skeletons with healed fractures that would have required weeks or months of recovery. A broken leg that's set properly means someone carried that person's food. Someone protected them. Someone changed their bedding. Someone stayed close at night. Elderly individuals, rare, yes, but present, exist in the record. People with worn joints, missing teeth, bodies that couldn't hunt well anymore, and still, they lived. They lived because they were valued, maybe for knowledge, maybe for story, maybe simply because they were family. That is not a small thing. It means compassion is old, older than cities, older than laws. Now let's speak of violence, softly, because it's there too. A world without armies can still be violent. A dispute over a mate, a raid over food, a feud that grows like a slow infection, a misunderstanding in a tense season. The bones sometimes show its skulls with cracks that healed, ribs pierced by points, forearms with defensive fractures. Not every injury is war. Some are accidents, falls, animals, mistakes. Still, in some sites we see clusters of deaths that feel organized, bodies jumbled, multiple wounds, the quiet evidence of people killing people. It's dark, yes, and it's also human, because the same bands that could care for an injured elder could also decide, collectively, that someone was too dangerous to keep. Reverse dominance. Anthropologists call it groups enforcing equality through mockery, through pressure, through exile, sometimes through death. That sounds cold until you remember the scale. In a band of 30, one violent person can destroy everyone. There is no prison, no police. There is only the group's nervous system protecting itself. And there's one more shadow in the record that I can't let go of. The quiet proof that someone, somewhere, tried to heal the impossible. Sometimes archaeologists find skulls with neat circular openings, like a deliberate window cut into bone. Trepanation. It's a word that sounds clinical, but the act itself is anything but. Imagine the scene without the sterile lights. Night. The fire is low, because you don't want to waste fuel. The air smells of damp earth and old smoke. The patient, maybe a hunter kicked by a wounded animal, maybe someone who fell on stone, lies with eyes half open, not fully here. Their breath is uneven. You can hear it catch, then rush, then slow again. Someone kneels beside them, hands steady in a way that only comes from practice. You don't practice this on paper. You practice it on living people, with the knowledge that a mistake is final. A stone blade is cleaned in hot water, or passed through flame, or rubbed with bitter plant sap that stings the skin. A handful of herbs is crushed, the smell sharp, medicinal, like green bitterness. Maybe it dulls pain. Maybe it calms panic. Maybe it does nothing at all, and belief has to carry the rest. You can feel the group around the fire, quiet, tense, protective. In a band, an injury is everyone's problem. If this person dies, the band loses skills, loses labor, loses a thread of its memory. And so they try. A cut, slow, careful. The sound is small, wet. I'm not going to linger on it too sharply, because this is a sleep story, but I want you to sense the courage in it, the willingness to touch the forbidden edge between life and death, with nothing but stone and knowledge. Bone is scraped, not hacked, scraped, patiently. You can almost hear the faint, gritty whisper as tool meets skull, as if time itself is being filed down. And sometimes, astonishingly, the person survives. New bone grows along the edge of the opening, a silent signature that says, "The body repaired." The band kept them alive long enough for healing to happen. That is medicine before medicine. Science wrapped in ritual. Expertise hidden inside myth. And when you remember that, another idea becomes gentle and strange. Our ancestors were not only adapting to landscapes, they were adapting to suffering. They were learning, again and again, what the body can endure. Think of fasting. Today it's a trend with apps and schedules. Back then it was weather. There are days when food is scarce. You feel your stomach turn from complaint to quiet acceptance. Your energy changes. Your senses sharpen, not because of magic, but because hunger makes the brain listen harder. You smell more. You watch more. You conserve movement. You become still. Then comes feast after a kill. The sudden heaviness of fat and meat, the warmth that spreads through the belly, the slow drowsiness that follows. And in that rhythm, empty, full, empty, full, the human metabolism learns flexibility like a language. Sometimes I wonder if our modern constant snacking confuses the body, if it misses the old pattern. You know that calm, almost floaty feeling when you haven't eaten for a while and your mind feels oddly clear? That's ancient circuitry humming. Even pain has a rhythm. Blisters become calluses. Cold becomes something you measure with your hands before you measure it with fear. The sting of smoke in the eyes becomes tolerable because smoke means warmth, cooking, protection. The ache in shoulders becomes background because carrying is what you do. None of this is heroic. It's just life, repeated until it becomes normal. And still, under that normal, the dark waits. A sudden infection, a child's fever, a predator's curiosity at the edge of light, another band's hungry eyes in a drought. So people develop rules, not written, but lived. Who sleeps where? Who tends the fire? Who gets the first cut of meat? Who speaks during conflict? Who jokes at the right moment to diffuse tension? Who steps between two angry men before a stone becomes a weapon? These are social technologies. They don't fossilize. They vanish like breath on cold air. Yet they may be the most important inventions of all. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine the soundscape of an ancient camp, the fire popping softly, a baby's tiny sigh, someone turning over, the scrape of skin against hide, the faint crunch of grass. Farther out, an owl calls, a wolf answers. The wind moves through branches and makes them whisper, and in that whisper there are human thoughts, private, unrecorded, doubts, longings, old grief, small joy, the kind of thoughts you have when you stare into embers and see shapes that aren't really there. I always feel a little humbled by that, because those lost years weren't pre-anything to the people living them. They were the present. They were a whole world. Okay, breathe with me. Let your shoulders loosen. Let the weight of your day slide off as if it's a cloak you can set beside the fire. Feel the slow certainty that your body knows how to rest, because it learned to rest under harder skies than this. And when you're ready, we'll take one more step forward, to the threshold where stone begins to rise, where floods swallow coastlines, and where the question of a forgotten complexity begins to haunt the modern mind. In the next part, we'll step forward to the edge of civilization's birth, where the ice loosens its grip, seas rise, Coastlines vanish, and people begin to build things so heavy they shouldn't exist yet. Stone temples before farming, pillars carved with animals, myths of floods. We'll walk into that uneasy threshold where evidence becomes louder again and the darkness takes a new shape. You can feel it, can't you? That subtle shift in the air when a story approaches the edge of proof. Up to now, we've been walking with small artifacts, flakes of stone, stained soil where a post once stood, a bead that survived by accident. The human world was huge, but the evidence was thin. Then, all at once, we reach a place where the ground speaks louder, and the loudest voice, for many people, is a hill in southeastern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe. Even saying the name feels like tapping a stone pillar with your knuckle and hearing the hollow answer. It's older than what most of us instinctively think is history. Older than pottery in many regions. Older than cities. Older than formal agriculture as a settled way of life. And yet it's monumental. T-shaped pillars, some weighing so much that your mind resists the number. Carvings of animals, foxes, snakes, boar, birds, etched into stone with a confidence that doesn't feel like a first attempt. The pillars stand like silent figures in a circle, as if they've been waiting for someone to remember how to listen. I'll be honest with you, I always feel a little dizzy when I think about it, because it forces a question that's both simple and unsettling. How did people who supposedly lived in small mobile bands, people we label hunter-gatherers, organize something like this? To move and raise stones that heavy, you need planning. You need a workforce. You need food for the workforce. You need coordination across time. You need shared purpose strong enough that people will spend days, weeks, seasons doing labor that does not immediately feed a child. That's the part that feels almost haunted. Not haunted with ghosts, exactly. Haunted with possibility. And this is where the story splits into two paths, and they stare at each other in the candlelight. One path is mainstream archaeology, careful and stubborn, insisting on evidence. It says, yes, this is surprising, but it does not require a lost, advanced civilization. It requires us to respect what forager societies can do when they are motivated, networked, and skilled. It says, humans can build big things without farming if resources are rich enough and social bonds are strong enough. The other path is the one people walk when the mystery feels too large to sit with. It's the lost civilization hypothesis, the whisper that says, what if there was something more, something organized, something complex along the Ice Age coasts that are now drowned? What if there were centers of knowledge, traditions of stonework, systems of symbol and ritual, and they were erased? Some names cling to this path. Graham Hancock is the most famous modern storyteller of it, weaving Göbekli Tepe into a broader vision. An Ice Age world with a high level of cultural or technical sophistication, crushed by catastrophe, remembered only as myth. It's a seductive idea, and you can see why it grabs people in the dark. We all feel, at some level, that our history has gaps. The deep time paradox isn't just about missing artifacts. It's about missing lives. If the sea swallowed the coastlines where humans love to live, then maybe it swallowed more than camps and middens. Maybe it swallowed whole chapters. Sea level during the last ice age was far lower. Continental shelves were dry land. River mouths were different. Bays were plains. Places that are now underwater places, a diver would call empty, were once the easiest places to live. Fish, shellfish, fresh water, smooth travel corridors. If you want to imagine where complexity could gather, coastlines are an obvious candidate. And then the water rises, slowly, then in pulses. Glaciers melt, the ocean creeps. It takes the old shores first, then the old river deltas, then the low plains. Camps disappear. Meeting places disappear. If any structures were built of wood, fiber, Earth, they vanish almost without leaving a signature. That thought is enough to make a person stare into a fire and feel small. Now add another layer: catastrophe. Around 12,800 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, the climate in the northern hemisphere snaps colder again, the Younger Dryas. It's one of those moments where nature shows how quickly it can change the rules. The world is warming, then suddenly, it isn't. Glaciers hesitate or advance. Ecosystems shift. Water patterns change. Animal populations move or collapse. For humans living close to the edge, it would have felt like betrayal, like spring turning into winter with a clenched fist. There's a controversial idea tied to this period: the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. The claim is that fragments of a comet or meteor broke apart and struck the ice sheets or atmosphere, triggering wildfires, cooling, and massive disruption. Supporters point to odd layers in sediment soot, tiny spheres, exotic materials arguing for an extraterrestrial event. Critics argue the evidence is not consistent enough, that dating is messy, that natural processes can produce some of these markers, that the hypothesis overreaches. I'm not here to hand you certainty in the dark. I'm here to sit with the discomfort. Because whether the trigger was cosmic or terrestrial, the fact remains. The end of the Ice Age was chaotic. Sea levels rose dramatically over thousands of years. Floods carved landscapes. New coastlines formed. Old ones drowned. If a complex coastal culture existed, whatever complex means, in that context, it would have been vulnerable. And here is where myths creep in like smoke. Flood stories appear all over the world. Mesopotamian deluges, Indian cycles of destruction, Pacific island tales of lands swallowed by the sea, stories in the Americas where water comes like punishment or cleansing. People love to point to these myths and say, "See, memory of real floods." Sometimes that's plausible. Humans lived through rising seas. They watched shorelines retreat. They would have had reasons to remember. But myths are tricky. They're not newspapers. They're dream language. They compress many events into one symbolic story. They spread, transform, adapt. A flood can be literal. A flood can be moral. A flood can be the feeling of life being overwhelmed. So we have to be careful. And yet, myths do something archaeology can't. They preserve emotional truth. They preserve the feeling of a world changing. Imagine a family returning to a familiar beach after a season inland, expecting the same dunes, the same flat sand where children played, and finding the sea has taken it. The old camp is gone. The hearthstones are underwater. The place where your grandmother told stories is now a line of waves. That loss would become a story. It would be told again and again, because telling it is how you keep it from dissolving. Now, back to evidence. The skeptics of a lost, advanced civilization make strong points. A true high-tech civilization, if we mean dense populations, metalworking, writing, large permanent cities, should leave unmistakable traces: trash layers, soil disturbance, industrial residues, extensive architecture, a footprint that doesn't vanish easily. So far, we don't have that. Older than roughly the early Holocene threshold in the way people imagine. We also see continuity in stone tools. Changes, yes. Innovations, yes. But not a clear flash of metal and writing that appears and disappears. Genetics, too, tells a story of bottlenecks and gradual expansions, rather than a global high-density population that collapses suddenly at the end of the Ice Age. All of that matters. Still, there's a softer possibility that lives between the extremes. Maybe there was no Atlantis-level world, no globe-spanning empire of Ice Age engineers. Maybe there were regional hubs, ritual centers, meeting places, seasonal gathering sites where many bands came together, places where knowledge accumulated. Places where certain specialists emerged: stoneworkers, ritual leaders, astronomically minded observers, memory keepers who could carry complex calendars in song. That kind of complexity doesn't require cities. It requires time, network, purpose. Göbekli Tepe could be that, a ceremonial magnet, a place where people met, traded, married, argued, danced, mourned, carved animals into stone, because the animals were not just meat, they were symbols, guardians, warnings, prayers. And here's a thought I find strangely calming. Sometimes we invent a lost civilization because we have been trained to underestimate small societies. We see hunter-gatherer, and we imagine simplicity. We forget that a group of 50 people can hold a universe of knowledge in their heads. We forget that organization can be temporary, fluid, powerful. We forget that human minds can coordinate without bureaucracy when the social fabric is tight enough. So maybe the dark truth is not that a grand civilization was lost, but that our modern imagination is the thing that's impoverished. Yet I won't dismiss the mystery, because the oceans still hide vast stretches of ancient shoreline. Underwater archaeology is difficult, expensive, slow. Much of the submerged world has never been properly mapped at high resolution. The jungle hides, ice hides, sediment hides. There are places where time still sleeps, and as technology improves sonar, LiDAR, satellite mapping, careful excavation, new surprises keep showing up. Footprints where we didn't expect them. Structures where we assumed emptiness. Dates that push back the timeline. The story is not finished. So tonight, as you drift, let your mind rest in the in-between. Between what we can prove and what we can imagine. Between skepticism and wonder. Between the comfort of a neat narrative and the unsettling beauty of uncertainty. Feel the slow rise and fall of your breath. Imagine the sea rising over a long-forgotten camp, covering it with quiet blue darkness. Imagine stone pillars on a hill, carved with animals, catching moonlight. Imagine stories being told about floods, about fire from the sky, about the world changing. And notice something very gently. Even if we never find a drowned city, even if there was never an Ice Age civilization in the way people dream, the lost years are still full of sophistication, full of art, full of medicine, full of social engineering, full of meaning. That's enough to haunt a person. Let's linger on the hill for a moment, because scale is hard to feel through numbers. Picture the approach at dawn. The ground is uneven, scattered with flint chips that sparkle when the first light hits them, like frost that doesn't melt. Your feet slide slightly on loose gravel. The air is thin and cool, and when you inhale, you taste dust dry, ancient dust that seems to coat the tongue. A line of people climbs with you, not an army, not a workforce in uniform. Families, friends, cousins, people who have walked together for years. Their breath shows faintly, then disappears. Someone carries a stone hammer, someone carries water, someone carries nothing but the weight of expectation. At the top, the pillars stand half buried in their own future. You run your hand along the carved surface and feel the grooves sharp enough to catch a fingernail. A fox, in relief, its body stretched like motion trapped in rock. A snake that seems to coil when the candlelight flickers. Birds with wings out, as if they're pinned mid-flight. I always imagine the sound of carving, not loud, just steady. Tap, tap, tap. The small ringing note of stone on stone, chips falling like hard snow. The rhythm becomes hypnotic if you listen long enough. A person can carve for hours, stopping only to flex cramped fingers, to blow dust from the cut, to squint and judge the line. And at night, when the work pauses, the pillars don't disappear. They become silhouettes against stars. Fires burn low in windbreaks. Voices soften. Someone points up and names a pattern in the sky, maybe not with our names, but with theirs. The sky is the only calendar that never gets drowned. This is where I can't help but think about memory. How do you persuade a group to build something like this? You don't do it with wages. You do it with story, with obligation, with fear, with awe, with the promise that the world is held together by rituals performed correctly, in the right place, at the right time. You know that feeling when you step into a cathedral or a temple and your voice drops without you choosing it? That reflex is older than cathedrals. It might be sitting right here, at a hill, with pillars that shouldn't exist yet. So when people argue about civilization, I hear a quieter question beneath it. What do we mean by advanced? Is it metal? Is it writing? Is it streets and laws? Or is it the ability to bind hundreds of minds into a shared purpose, to make them show up season after season, to move stones heavier than any one person, to carve animals into pillars as if the animals are watching back? That kind of advancement leaves a footprint, just not always the one we were trained to look for. In the next part, we'll follow the thread from these ceremonial stones toward the first true villages, where staying in one place begins to feel possible, and where the darkness changes again from the wild uncertainty of deep time to the sharp, intimate tensions of settlement, jealousy, property, hierarchy, and the first quiet seeds of organized power. Stay with me. We're stepping from the hill of pillars into the first slow, the sticky idea that will change everything. Staying. It doesn't happen like a switch. It happens like dampness creeping into a cloak. One season you linger a little longer near a good spring. Next year you return earlier. Then you start leaving things behind on purpose, stones set aside, a hearth ringed more carefully, a shallow pit lined with hide, so it holds water for a while. Small decisions, repeated until they become a life. And in the darkness of that change, something begins to wake. Property. Not in the modern sense, with paper and locks and law courts. I mean the feeling, the sensation that this place is ours, that this patch of ground is not just a stop on the way to somewhere else, but a center, a heart. It feels comforting at first. It feels like safety. You know that tired relief when you return to a familiar room and your body relaxes before your mind can explain why? Imagine that relief multiplied by generations. The same bend in the river, the same stand of trees, the same stone outcrop where you can sharpen flint, the same wind that blows from the same direction in the same season. Familiarity becomes a blanket, but blankets can also become nets, because once you stay, you can be found. Once you build even a simple structure, posts, hides, woven mats, you have something that can be taken. Once you store food, you have something worth stealing. Once you bury the dead in the same soil year after year, you have ancestors rooted there, and leaving begins to feel like betrayal. So the old freedom, walk away from conflict, split the band, move to a new valley, starts to thin. A dispute that might once have ended with a simple separation now drags, because there's a home at stake. This is where the story turns darker in a quiet way. I want you to picture a late Ice Age landscape as the climate warms. Glaciers retreat like exhausted beasts. Meltwater swells rivers, carving new channels, flooding old ones. Plains that were dry become marsh. Marsh becomes grassland. The air itself feels different, wetter, heavier, full of scents that weren't there before. In some regions, wild grains begin to thrive. Stands of barley or einkorn shimmer in the breeze, pale and tempting. A person can walk through them and feel the heads brush their legs like soft hands. The seeds are small, stubborn, packed with energy. At first, people just harvest. They've always harvested. But now the stands are dense enough, dependable enough, that a band can return and know the grain will be there. That dependability is seductive. There's a sound to it, the dry whisper of stalks rubbed between palms, the gentle rattle of seeds in a woven basket. the soft crunch underfoot when you walk through a field after the harvest. It's a different music than hunting. Hunting is tension quiet, sudden violence, then the heavy work of butchering and carrying. Harvesting is patient, repetitive, almost meditative, and if you do it long enough, you begin to notice patterns. The plants grow better where seeds fell last season. They grow better where you cleared brush. They grow better where you burned the ground lightly and the ash fed them. So you help them, just a little. You don't call it farming. You don't know you are inventing it. You are simply doing what humans do, leaning into what works. But when you lean into grain, grain leans back into you. It wants you to stay near it. It wants you to defend it. It wants you to clear competitors, other plants, other animals, other humans. It wants you to build storage, and storage wants you to count, and counting wants you to guard. This is the old dark joke of history. We did not domesticate crops alone. Crops domesticated us. The moment you store food, you invite the first thieves. Animals first, rodents, birds, insects, then humans. And the first time someone steals from your stored food, it doesn't feel like losing a day's hunt. It feels like someone reached into your future and tore a piece out. That's when anger changes. In a mobile band, anger is sharp but brief. You fight, you reconcile, you move. With storage, anger becomes possessive. It becomes a low hum that can last seasons. This is also where hierarchy begins to creep in, not always through brute force, but through organization. Someone has to decide how much grain goes where. Someone has to mediate disputes when one family claims another took more than their share. Someone has to plan for lean times. Someone has to remember. The memory keeper becomes powerful. Sometimes that person is generous, sometimes they are not. And once power exists, even in the smallest form, betrayal becomes possible in a new way. Not just personal betrayal, the affair, the lie, but structural betrayal, the quiet shifting of resources, the manipulation of rules, the slow creation of us and them inside what used to be a single kin group. If you listen closely, you can hear the future empires warming up in those early arguments. It's dark, yes, but I'm going to tell it softly, because this is also where human tenderness intensifies. Sedentary life changes family rhythms. Children grow up surrounded by more faces. Grandparents become more common. Skills deepen pottery, weaving, specialized tools, elaborate rituals. Villages become memory made visible. And with memory comes a different kind of grief. When a child dies in a village, the little grave sits there. It does not vanish into a forest that you leave behind. You pass it every day. You step around it. You remember. That constant proximity to loss can make a community gentle. It can also make it desperate. Now, let's return to the threshold we stood on earlier. Monumental stone. Sites like Göbekli Tepe suggest that ritual gathering may have come before full farming. It's possible that the need to feed and host large gatherings pushed people toward more intensive management of food. In other words, the temple may have helped create the field. Think about that for a moment, because it's beautifully unsettling. Not food first, then religion, but meaning first, then food to support meaning. I can almost see it. Hundreds of people arriving from different bands, carrying meat, hides, beads, stories, grudges, the air full of voices, smoke rising in columns, dogs prowling, hoping for scraps, the carved pillars looming, watching. A ritual requires timing. Timing requires a calendar. A calendar requires observation, stars, seasons, the behavior of animals, the ripening of plants. Observation becomes knowledge. Knowledge becomes authority. Authority becomes the seed of leadership. So while a modern mind wants to separate spiritual from practical, the deep past refuses. Everything is braided: hunger and awe, sex and inheritance, myth and storage. And under it all, the environment keeps changing. The Holocene settles in. The climate becomes more stable, stable enough that staying begins to feel sensible. Rivers stop behaving like strangers. Forests return. Herds shift. The world offers humans a bargain. If you anchor yourselves, I will reward you with predictability. Humans accept. And then, almost immediately, the price appears. A surplus is not just extra food. It is a lever. Whoever controls it can demand labor, loyalty, obedience. Whoever guards the storehouse becomes the beginning of a ruler. And the first ruler, I suspect, did not look like a king. They looked like a helpful organizer, a respected elder, a ritual leader with calm eyes. They smiled. They distributed grain. They remembered debts. Then, slowly, they began to keep more for themselves. This is how most monsters are born in history, not with horns, but with small permissions that no one stops early enough. Now, breathe. Let the fire crackle. Let the candlelight soften the edges of these thoughts. You don't have to carry the whole weight of human history tonight. Just let it drift through you like smoke. I want to linger with you in one ordinary night, because ordinary nights are where the dark changes hide. Imagine a cluster of shelters on a low rise above a river. The structures are simple frames of saplings bent and tied, roofs of reeds, walls of hides, patched where old tears were sewn shut. Nothing looks permanent in the way stone looks permanent. Yet the very repetition of the layout makes it feel settled. Paths worn in the dirt, a circle where feet have turned the ground smooth, a line of stones marking the edge of a shared hearth. The sun has dropped. The last light is a bruised band along the horizon. Smoke hangs low because the air is damp. It tastes like burned wood and fat, and when you breathe it in, it clings to the back of your throat the way a memory clings after a dream. Inside the village, the sounds are layered. A baby fussing in short, exhausted bursts. A dog shaking its coat, scattering droplets. Someone coughing, deep and wet. The kind of cough that makes other people glance over, not with panic yet, but with that quiet calculation. Will this spread? Near the storage pit, two figures kneel. One holds a basket. The other holds a flat stone lid, smeared with clay. Their hands are dusty with grain flour, their nails dark. When they lift the lid, the air that comes out is warm and stale, and you can smell it. Dry seeds, earth, a faint sourness where moisture threatened rot, and the clay saved it. And then, the moment, they pause. One of them counts the baskets with their eyes. They don't have numbers the way we do. Not neatly, not written, but they have memory. They have the sense of this many, held like a shape in the mind. Something is missing. Not much. Enough to fit in a palm. Enough that, in a good year, you could shrug and say an animal got in. Enough that, in a bad year, could be the difference between a child's belly tightening in hunger or loosening in sleep. The first figure inhales sharply. The second figure looks away too quickly. That's how it begins. A missing handful, averted eyes, a story forming in the dark. They speak softly, because shouting would wake everyone, and waking everyone would turn a private problem into a public fire. Their voices are low, clipped, a question, a denial, a quiet accusation that lands like a stone dropped into water, no splash, but ripples that go out and out. If you've ever been in a small group where everyone depends on everyone, you know the feeling. The way tension feels physical, like the air thickens. The way your skin becomes aware of other people's breathing. The way a single conflict threatens to infect everything, because there is nowhere to hide. Someone else approaches an older person, perhaps moving slowly, joints stiff from years of carrying loads. They don't come with authority like a guard. They come with the weary patience of someone who has watched arguments ruin lives. They listen. They tilt their head. They ask each person to repeat their version. They pause between sentences long enough that the silence itself becomes a tool, forcing everyone to hear their own words. And in that pause, you can hear the village around them, the river sliding over stones, the reed roofs whispering in the breeze, the distant call of a night bird that sounds, if you really listen, like a warning. The older person decides, not with a gavel, but with a suggestion that is hard to refuse. The missing amount will be replaced from tomorrow's gathering. The person suspected will help with extra work. No one will say the word thief aloud, because once you name it, you make it real. Everyone nods, but the feeling doesn't leave. It settles into the village like a thin layer of ash. You won't see it in the morning, but it will be there, on every surface, in every breath. Later, when the fire is lower, when the cooking stones have cooled enough to touch, people gather for story. This part is ancient, older than villages. The circle around flame, the faces lit from below so the eyes look deeper, the cheekbones sharper, the shadows under noses like small masks. A storyteller begins, and the story is familiar. A tale about a greedy person who tried to keep more than their share and was cursed by the spirits of the river. The curse is told softly, with gentle rhythm, but the message is sharp. Share or you will suffer. The suspected person sits very still. The storyteller never looks directly at them. No one says their name. That's the village's kind of violence. Not the spear, but the gaze avoided, the joke that cuts, the myth that disciplines. And still, there is kindness. When the story ends, someone passes a bit of roasted marrow. Someone adjusts a sleeping child's blanket. Someone touches the elder's shoulder in thanks. The fire pops, and a spark lifts and vanishes. In that ordinary night, you can see the whole future in miniature. Law without writing, punishment without prisons, power without crowns. It's unsettling. It's also human. So as you drift, let that image soften. A handful of grain, a circle of firelight, a story that is both comfort and warning. The village is being born, quietly, one breath at a time. If you're still with me, listening to the soft hiss of the fire, then we're ready for the last threshold, the one that feels like a wave in the dark. Flood. It's such an old word that it barely feels like a warning anymore. We hear it and think of weather, a rainy week, a river overflowing, something the news reports and then moves on. But for the people living at the end of the last ice age, flood could mean the world changing shape in front of their eyes. Sea levels rose as the ice melted, not in a single day, not in a neat cinematic surge, but relentlessly, year after year, generation after generation. A shoreline you knew as a child would be different when you were old. A place where you gathered shellfish would be deeper and deeper until the water swallowed it and the fish became the only witnesses. You can feel the dread of that if you let your mind slow down enough, because humans love edges. We love coasts, river mouths, places where fresh water meets salt, where land meets abundance. We build our lives there, even now. We pretend it's permanent, even now. Imagine ancient families living on a wide continental shelf that is dry land in their time flat, fertile, threaded with rivers. They learn every curve of the dunes. They build camps that return each season. They bury their dead in sandy soil, where the wind sings softly at night. Then, the water creeps in. First, it's subtle. Salt taste on the breeze more often. Strange driftwood where it wasn't before. Pools that used to be fresh becoming brackish. Plants changing, birds changing. A few steps of land gone after a storm. You can rationalize that. Storms happen, but then it keeps happening. And one day a child walks to the place where their grandmother always found shellfish. and the child finds only water, quiet, indifferent, and deeper than it used to be. The child stands there, toes in cold foam, and looks back at the adults as if to ask, "Did the sea move?" The adults don't answer right away, because answering means admitting something unbearable. The world is not keeping its promises. Now, in that long, slow drowning of coastlines, entire human histories could vanish. Camps, hearths, ritual stones, trade hubs. The places where stories were told and lovers met and old arguments were forgiven. If any of those places held more complex structures, anything that required long, stable habitation, then the sea was a perfect eraser. This is where the modern imagination gets restless. We look at the blank spaces in the archaeological record and we feel an itch. We want to fill it with something dramatic, something like a lost civilization, drowned cities, an Atlantis for every continent. I understand the temptation. Truly, I do. There's something almost soothing about the idea that the past was full of grand things that were taken away, because it makes our own loneliness feel less personal. It says, "You're not alone in losing. Your species has been losing worlds for a very long time." Writers and researchers like Graham Hancock have argued that there may have been an Ice Age culture, maybe not skyscrapers and machines, but something more organized, more technically skilled than we usually imagine for hunter-gatherers. A culture that could have lived on those drowned coasts, and that could have been shattered by catastrophe near the end of the Ice Age. And there is a real catastrophe in the scientific record that sounds like myth if you say it aloud. The Younger Dryas, a sudden return to colder conditions around 12,800 years ago, just as the planet was warming. A tightening of winter's fist, ecosystems shifting, stress on human groups. Some have suggested that this abrupt change might be tied to an impact event, fragments of a comet or something like it, leaving behind odd markers in sediments, tiny spherules, layers of soot, strange mineral signatures. It's debated. It's argued over. It's the kind of scientific dispute that, from a distance, feels like people standing around a dimly lit map, pointing at the same smudges and telling different stories about what they mean. Mainstream archaeology tends to be cautious here, and for good reasons. A civilization, if we mean cities, writing, metalworking, usually leaves a thick trail, dense trash deposits, clear infrastructure, unmistakable artifacts. We don't have that, unambiguously, before about 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. But caution does not mean the past was simple. Sometimes, the most frightening possibility is not that there was a lost high-tech world, but that there were many small worlds, regional centers of ritual and trade, complex networks, impressive architecture, made with stone and bone and wood, worlds fully meaningful to their people, fully civilized in the sense of culture, and then gone, because time is not sentimental. Think about what it means to be human in deep time. You don't need a palace to have a sacred center. You don't need writing to have law. You don't need metal to move stones if you have enough hands, enough song, enough shared purpose. So when we find a site like Göbekli Tepe, massive pillars, intricate carvings, built by people who may not yet have fully adopted farming, it doesn't have to be proof of a lost empire. It can be proof of something equally astonishing, that small-scale societies can gather, organize, and build wonders purely through social glue and belief. And belief is a technology. It binds people. It turns labor into devotion. It makes someone haul a stone heavier than their own body, because the stone means something. Still, the ocean keeps its secrets. Underwater archaeology is hard, expensive, slow. Vast stretches of ancient coastline lie under hundreds of feet of water, covered in silt, scoured by currents. We have looked at only a fraction of it. The past may be waiting under salt and pressure, patient as stone. This is where I like to slow down and let uncertainty be gentle instead of frightening. Because not knowing is part of the story. Prehistory is not a tidy book. It is a room lit by a single candle. You see what is close. The rest is shadow. And in those shadows, myths grow. Flood myths appear in many cultures. Stories of land swallowed, of survivors, of warnings ignored. It's tempting to read them as literal memories of rising seas and catastrophic events. Sometimes they might be. Sometimes a story is a memory that learned to wear symbolism so it could survive thousands of years. A flood myth can also be a psychological truth. The feeling that the world can change suddenly. The knowledge that stability is borrowed. The fear that everything you love could be taken not by an enemy, but by water, ice, disease, chance. If you've ever woken from a dream where you were trying to save someone while the environment shifted around you, then you already understand why flood stories stick. Now, let's return to the most intimate scale again. One person, one night. Picture a woman, let's call her that, though the word is ours, not hers, standing on a cliff above a coast. The air is cold enough to sting the inside of her nose. Her hair is damp with sea mist. She can taste salt on her lips. Below, the water is restless, moving in slow, heavy swells. Behind her, the village is quiet. Small fires, low murmurs. A dog whines in its sleep. Somewhere, a child turns over and exhales. She is awake because something in her refuses to settle. Maybe she has seen the waterline creep closer each year. Maybe an elder told her a story about a camp far out on the shelf where the ancestors used to gather, now gone. Maybe she saw a storm rip apart a familiar dune and reveal old bones, old tools. As if the sea was tossing back the past like unwanted food, she stands there and tries to imagine the coastline as it was when her grandparents were young. She tries to hold it in her mind like a drawing. Then she looks down again and realizes the water does not care about drawings. That realization can feel like despair. It can also feel like a kind of calm, because if the world is always changing, then clinging too hard is a kind of suffering. In that calm, she does what humans have done for at least 70,000 years. She makes meaning. She whispers a small prayer, not to a named God, maybe, but to the idea of continuity. She asks for the children to survive. She asks for the river to keep flowing. She asks the dead to stay near. And then she goes back to the village, where the living are warm. This is how we move through catastrophe. Not as heroes in shining armor, but as tired people who keep feeding each other, keep telling stories, keep lighting fires. If there was a lost world beneath the sea, it was lost this way, with someone turning away from a drowned shoreline and choosing, because they had to build again inland. If there wasn't, if the past was always bands and camps and ritual centers rather than cities, then the same truth holds. People kept adapting, kept improvising, kept becoming human over and over. By about 12,000 years ago, the world looks different. Ice retreats, forests spread, rivers stabilize. In some places, villages become more common. In some places, agriculture becomes more deliberate. In some places, walls appeared Jericho's famous early fortifications. For example, stone boundaries that suggest a new kind of fear, not just predators, but other humans. And this is the quiet, dark pivot where the long era of relative egalitarianism begins to fracture more often. When you live in a mobile band, dominance is hard to maintain. People can leave. When you live behind a wall, leaving becomes costly. When food is stored, controlling storage becomes a path to control people. You don't need to imagine an evil genius to understand how this happens. You only need to imagine hunger and memory and a person who says, "I will keep you safe." Safety is intoxicating. Sometimes it's real. Sometimes it becomes a cage. The first rulers likely began as coordinators. The first taxes likely began as contributions. The first armies likely began as hunting parties repurposed for defense. Then, the stories change. The myths shift. The gods become more centralized, mirroring the new human centers of power. The old spirits of river and grove and wandering animal are still there, but now there are larger forces, sky gods, law gods, kings who claim divine favor. And through it all, the body stays ancient. Even when you sleep in a house, your nervous system still listens for predators. Even when you eat grain every day, your metabolism still remembers feast and famine. Even when you live among thousands, your heart still craves the intimacy of a circle of firelight. That's what I want you to carry out of this story. The long continuity beneath the surface changes. Civilization is young. Your bones are old. And the darkness we've traced tonight, the missing evidence, the drowned coasts, the sudden climate snaps, the birth of hierarchy, none of it has to keep you awake. If anything, it can do the opposite. It can remind you that you are part of a species that has always lived with uncertainty and still found ways to make warmth. So let the unanswered questions be like the shadows in this room. They don't have to be threats. They can be space. They can be quiet. As the fire settles into embers, as the candle leans and flickers, imagine those lost 100,000 years not as a blank, but as countless nights like this one. People breathing, people listening, people drifting into sleep while someone nearby keeps the flame alive. And if you feel small against that span of time, that's okay. Smallness can be peaceful. It means you don't have to control everything. You only have to rest. Breathe in, breathe out. Let the sea keep its secrets for tonight. Let the ice melt in silence. Let the old stories fold themselves around you like a cloak. Before you fully let go, notice your own room, the way the air feels heavier near the floor, the way sound travels differently when you're close to sleep. If there's a small noise, a distant motor, a pipe settling, let it become part of the landscape, like wind over grass or water against stone. Your mind doesn't have to chase it. It can simply hear it and then drift past it. I like to imagine the last storyteller in a winter camp, someone with tired eyes, voice low, speaking not to impress, not to teach, but to soothe. Their words move slowly, like hands smoothing a blanket. Around them, faces soften. The sharp edge of fear dulls. Even grief becomes quieter, not gone, just held. That is what these dark histories can do when you let them. They turn terror into distance. They turn catastrophe into a rhythm. They remind you that night always arrives and night always passes. Now, let the embers dim further. Let your jaw unclench. Let your shoulders sink as if the bed is a warm hollow made for you. There's nothing you need to solve. There is only the gentle, ancient act of closing your eyes and joining the countless sleepers who came before you. Good night.